Who is Rosie the Riveter? You might not recognize the name, but if I showed you this image, a large majority of the population will know. She is used in practically anything nowadays, but how and why is she so influential? How did Rosie the Riveter become an icon she is today? Rosie the Riveter communicated that anyone can do hard work regardless of gender. It's an empowering message that is still shown today, but shows women expected to return to traditional roles after, which defeats the purpose. Before World War II, people were moving on from the Great Depression. At the time, everyone was desperate for a job. Women and teenagers of households especially. The jobs women usually had were a housekeeper, babysitter, or a laundromat worker. Something uncommon but not too overly masculine.
My mother's friends, they were all doing housework or working in restaurants. And, well, that was just about all that was open to them. Now, my mother was fortunate. She got a job in a hotel. It was O's Hotel at that time. It's Jack Tar now, I think. But there, too, she was just making the beds. She was a chambermaid. That's what they called it at that time. And I just didn't want any of those jobs.
In World War II, a demand for war aid was immense. Since this was after the Great Depression, the atmosphere of America was in a delicate situation. In 1942, Howard J. Miller and the War Production Coordinating Committee collaborated to make We Can Do It. And she was born. This character was the personification of a woman's role in the war. The line was originally supposed to be inspirational. All your life you get reminded that you're supposed to be a great housewife and a proud mother until you perish. How could this not be great? The government is endorsing female participation. Howard J. Miller's picture inspired women all over the U.S. to work as riveters, nurses, or even Air Force workers. The amount of women working was incredible. Quote, in 1945, women comprised 36.1% of the civilian labor force. At the height of the war, there were 19 million and 100,700 women in the labor force. Between 1940 and 1945, the female labor force grew by 50%. 1 in 10 married women entered the labor force. Unquote. Of course, there were more influences that were inspired by this main piece. Many other feminist characters were made. A song made in 1943, Rosie the Riveter by Four Vagabonds, was the first to name Miller's character. Quote, that little frail can do more than a male can do. Rosie the Riveter. Rosie's got a boyfriend, Charlie. Charlie, he's a Marine. Rosie is protecting Charlie, working overtime on the riveting machine. End quote. This shows that the message was always, in order to succeed, you as females should protect your sons, husbands, or brothers by working in factories. Giving a character a name definitely made her have depth. She probably joined to protect her brother or husband. The environment of the workplace was very exciting. But because of the circumstances, a lot of these women had to teach themselves how to run these machines. And if it wasn't the correct work, some would be fired. One experience from a Rosie was mainly positive. Before the war, she was a housekeeper. You can tell she's proud by her accomplishments. This has to be the first start of feminism, at least the seeds of it. Rosie's made it possible to be as strong as a man, and they thought they were even better than the men.
And it wasn't any time before we got the knack of it. Because for one thing, women's hands weren't as big and clumsy as men. We had to grind our own tools. So therefore, it was easier for us to know when to stop grinding, how to take the machine loose. We had more of a subtle touch with it. Really, I mean, we did better than the men.
A rejected picture that isn't so known would be Rosie the Riveter by Norman Rockwell. This concept is a little more concrete. She has a welding gun and her face is dirty and she's muscular. People who read the magazine on May 29, 1939 were not too happy about this portrait because she was too masculine. You can tell that even though a lot of factories were hiring women, the stereotype was still feminine, petite, and hardworking girls. This message of a messy and strong and independent woman was looked as not the social norm. There was a limit of acceptance. After the war, women were asked for their resignation. Even when females did everything in their power to help, at last anti-feminism propaganda was used against them. The message for empowerment was no longer valid. This time the plea was to go back to the house and be a mother. And when perks of being a veteran in the front lines were available to get, they still discriminated against women and didn't think they were qualified for them. This experience led them to be very, very disappointed, humiliated, and defeated because they had to go back to normal rules that they could not go. Not because of the pay decrease, but also they experienced something they never thought, and they imagined themselves as not doing this anymore.
I had a daughter I had to feed. So after I couldn't get these other jobs, well, then I had to fall back on the only other thing I knew, and that was doing domestic work. And it was a very defeating thing for me, very. The articles in the magazines changed. They start telling you how to cook things that took a long time. You know, during the war, they was telling you how to cook dishes that you could cook quick and get on to work. Now they were telling you how to cook dishes that took a full day. There were more articles in there about raising your children and the psychological development of your children. They never mentioned that, you know, any psychological development before the war. The movies changed to romantic kind of macho wars. The man was back home and the women was submissive and the man was macho. Before, both of them was macho. The nurse was dying with the soldier in the field. Now it was a whole different tack and a whole different kind of propaganda to let women know what they should be doing.
Another thing that was also very heartbreaking is one woman would go to a welding school after work. And when she graduated, she went to get a welding job because she really enjoyed it. She had every single qualification, but something that they did discriminate her against was her gender. And if it wasn't for her gender, she would have been hired.
There was an ad in the paper, and I heard, too, that they were needing welders at Mare Island. So I took my card and all my credentials and everything. I went out there, and I laid my papers on the desk, and he looked at them, and he said, all right. He said, if you was a man, we'd hire you, but we can't hire you. You're a woman.
The empowerment of Rosie the Riveter is still known today. In modern feminism, you see this image a lot. Blindly, it creates a very strong message for females, but the hypocrisy of this propaganda is immense. This is still an issue today with young impressionable girls. Should we influence them to glamorize anything with their gender like Miller's? Or do we bring them up with a more masculine female role model like Rockwell's picture? Another issue that is still being tested today is the social norms of women. There is still a debate whether women should be housewives or independentize themselves without a man. Rosie the Riveter was one of the first leaders for feminism. Of course, it all became the same after World War II. But this had a different generation of females who questioned the traditional views. This very much impacted the way these girls, or, females, looked at certain propaganda now, since they themselves had the experience. This has to be the one and first looks of feminism and definitely more women's rights.